Niccolò Machiavelli was a famous diplomat, strategist, and political thinker who wrote one of the most well-known books about power. Most people know him as the author of The Prince and see him as a cold and calculating mastermind. But behind that image was a very human story. For most of his life, Machiavelli was deeply involved in politics. He worked as a senior diplomat for the Florentine Republic and traveled across Europe, meeting kings, generals, and powerful leaders. During these years, he carefully observed how powerful men gained control and how they eventually lost it. One question fascinated him more than anything else. Why do powerful men destroy themselves? Again and again, he saw the same pattern. Leaders with intelligence, resources, and armies under their command still managed to lose everything. It was rarely because of enemies alone. Often the real cause came from their own uncontrolled desires. Machiavelli noticed that many powerful men struggled to control their emotions, especially when personal attraction and the need for admiration entered the situation. Even the most disciplined leaders could become impulsive when desire influenced their decisions. Ironically, the man who studied this weakness so carefully faced similar struggles in his own life. In 1512, the political situation in Florence changed, and Machiavelli suddenly lost his government position. He was arrested for a short time and later sent away from political life. Forced into exile on a small farm outside the city, he found himself cut off from the world of power he had once known. During this period, he began writing some of his most famous works, but he also spent a great deal of time reflecting on human behavior and the emotional forces that influence people's decisions. From these reflections came one of his most important insights. Understanding human weakness is easier than mastering it. A person may clearly see a pattern in others, yet still struggle with the same impulses themselves. For Machiavelli, this realization became the beginning of a deeper exploration into the psychology of power and human desire. After Machiavelli lost his political position and was forced into exile, his life became much quieter on the surface. The man who once negotiated with powerful rulers was now living on a small farm outside Florence. His daily routine changed completely. During the day, he managed simple farm matters and spent time with ordinary villagers. But the evenings were different. In letters written to his close friend Francesco Vettori, Machiavelli described how he sometimes visited local taverns where people gathered to talk, drink, and escape the worries of daily life. These letters are important because they reveal Machiavelli's inner thoughts with unusual honesty. In them, he does not try to present himself as a flawless thinker. Instead, he writes openly about his emotions, frustrations, and personal habits. Sometimes he described meeting women in these places and spending time in their company. What makes these writings fascinating is not the situation itself, but Machiavelli's awareness of what was happening inside his own mind. He often analyzed his own behavior as if he were observing another person. He would notice how quickly emotions could influence decisions. Even when he recognized that someone might be using charm or attention to influence him, he admitted that the emotional pull could still be strong. This realization led him to a powerful psychological insight. Understanding a weakness intellectually does not automatically remove its influence. A person may clearly see a pattern and still feel its pull. Knowledge can reveal the trap, but emotional impulses can still guide behavior if a person is not careful. Machiavelli saw this pattern not only in himself, but also in many powerful men he had studied during his diplomatic career. Leaders who were brilliant in strategy could still become surprisingly impulsive when emotions were involved. For Machiavelli, this was not simply a personal flaw, it was a universal human pattern. Desire has a unique ability to narrow a person's focus. When emotions become intense, people often concentrate on the immediate feeling instead of the long-term consequences. A man who normally evaluates every risk carefully may suddenly ignore warning signs when emotional excitement enters the situation. Machiavelli believed this was one of the most underestimated forces in human behavior. Throughout history, he had seen powerful leaders lose their position not because they lacked intelligence, but because they underestimated the influence of their own emotions. This realization pushed him to study human psychology even more deeply. He began asking questions that still matter today. Why does desire sometimes overpower logic? Why do intelligent people occasionally make decisions they later regret? And most importantly, why do people repeat the same emotional mistakes even when they understand the pattern? For Machiavelli, the answer was connected to awareness. Most individuals believe they are fully in control of their decisions. But in reality, many choices are influenced by emotional needs that operate quietly beneath the surface. If those needs remain unexamined, they can guide behavior without the person even realizing it. This is why Machiavelli believed observation was one of the most powerful tools a person can develop. By watching your own reactions carefully, you begin to see patterns that would otherwise remain hidden. You start to notice what situations trigger strong emotions. You recognize when your thinking becomes less clear. And slowly, you develop the ability to pause before acting. Machiavelli himself practiced this kind of observation. Even when he struggled with certain impulses, he documented them honestly in his letters. Instead of pretending to be perfect, he studied his own weaknesses. In many ways, this honesty is what makes his writing still relevant today. He was not simply teaching strategies for controlling others. He was also exploring the far more difficult challenge of understanding and managing the forces inside the human mind. Machiavelli's observations about men slowly formed a clear psychological pattern. After years of watching rulers, soldiers, merchants, and ordinary men, he began to notice that the same weakness appeared again and again. It didn't matter how intelligent a man was or how much power he had. When strong desire appeared, his thinking often changed. Machiavelli noticed that desire could create a kind of blind spot in the mind. A man who normally thinks carefully about consequences can suddenly ignore obvious risks. His attention becomes focused only on the thing he wants in that moment. Long-term thinking becomes weaker, and emotional impulses take control. Today, modern psychology explains this process more clearly. When a person experiences strong emotional desire, the logical part of the brain responsible for planning and judgment becomes less active. At the same time, deeper emotional systems connected to reward and survival become more active. In simple terms, emotion temporarily takes priority over logic. Machiavelli did not know the scientific explanation, but he clearly saw the pattern through experience. He watched powerful leaders negotiate complex political agreements during the day, showing patience and discipline, and then behave completely differently when personal desires entered the situation. To him, this revealed something important about human nature. Power in the outside world does not always mean control over the inner world. A man might command armies, manage governments, or build large fortunes, yet still struggle to manage his own emotions. And according to Machiavelli, the most dangerous situation appears when a person believes he is immune to these influences. Men who believed they were always rational often became the easiest to influence. Because they never examined their emotional triggers, they failed to notice when their judgment was quietly being affected. Machiavelli believed awareness was the first line of defense. If a person can observe the moment when emotion begins to cloud their thinking, they gain a small window of control. That brief moment of awareness can create the distance needed to pause, reconsider, and make a better decision. But without that awareness, behavior becomes automatic. Desire appears, emotion rises, and action follows. This cycle, repeated again and again, was something Machiavelli saw throughout his life. It was not limited to one type of man or one social class. It was simply part of being human, and that realization pushed him to look even deeper into the psychological weaknesses that desire often reveals. Machiavelli eventually identified 3 common weaknesses he repeatedly saw in men. The first was the need for validation. Many men, even powerful ones, secretly wanted admiration and approval from the women they desired. In that moment, being seen as impressive became more important than actually being strong or disciplined. When a man depends on someone else's approval to feel confident, he unknowingly gives that person influence over his emotions. The second weakness was how desire distorts risk. Machiavelli observed that men in a strong emotional state often underestimate danger. They ignore warnings, trust people too quickly, and make decisions they would normally avoid. History shows many examples where intelligent men damaged their own position simply because emotion clouded their judgment. The third weakness was the desire to escape control. Being powerful, responsible, and always thinking strategically can be exhausting. For some men, emotional attraction becomes a temporary escape from that pressure. In those moments, they stop analyzing and simply follow the feeling, even if it leads them into situations that weaken their position. Machiavelli's real lesson was not that desire is wrong. His point was that unconscious desire can quietly guide decisions without a person realizing it. That is why awareness matters. When you observe your own emotions honestly, you begin to understand what is actually driving your choices. You can recognize when you are seeking validation, when emotion is clouding your thinking, and when you are acting out of habit instead of intention. Knowledge alone is not enough, but awareness is the first step toward self-control. Machiavelli spent his final years reflecting on these patterns. He understood human nature deeply, yet he also understood how difficult it is to fully master oneself. And that may be the most honest lesson his life leaves behind. The real question is simple. Are you aware of the forces that influence your decisions, or are they quietly guiding you without your knowledge? If you found this perspective interesting, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more insights about power, psychology, and human behavior.